Good morning and welcome to this morning's session on Microsoft 365 licensing. So we're briefly going to cover kind of what's included in Microsoft licensing and how you know what you need. We're aware that after the introduction of NCE licensing last year, a lot of people will be coming up for renewals, and people that aren't on the NCE program might be looking to join it and convert, or alternatively just want to know a bit more about how to maximize the use of Microsoft 365 licensing. So my name's Pete Murphy. I'm the practice lead for Modern Workplace here at Cloud Direct, and I'll be taking you through a few questions that we can ask around licensing this morning. So just if you're not aware of Cloud Direct in great detail, just a very brief overview of kind of our accreditations and how we've been kind of verified by Microsoft as a leading partner. So as of October last year, a lot of the old advanced specializations that were held by a lot of Microsoft partners were kind of replaced by solution designations. And at the time of go live, we had attained 5 out of the 6 of these solutions designations. The only one that we are not holding at present is around Microsoft Dynamics, and that's not something that we really touch. We have partner organizations that help us in that area. So everything that we work on, we are recognized as being experts in the Microsoft ecosystem, and including across the Azure stack, we are an expert MSP, of which there are limited numbers kind of globally, and even more limited obviously in the UK. So we feel we're well placed to talk through Microsoft technologies with you. Just in terms of agenda for this session, I don't anticipate it being a long session, so you'll likely get some time back from the webinar schedule. But there's a few things that we do want to talk through and give you some pointers. Firstly, around the CSP and the NCE programs and what's included in both of them. There is a transition from CSP to NCE happening, Microsoft led, so we can talk through that. Can talk through what's actually in your Microsoft 365 licensing. We won't go into a lot of detail because they cover a broad range of products, but we can briefly go through how you can find out what you're entitled to by nature of having your licensing, and some resources in that front. How can you track what you're using? So utilization of those licenses is obviously important. You're paying for them, so how can we make sure you're getting the most out of them? Which license is right for your organization? Obviously, that's a tricky question to answer. So we can give you some pointers around how you can identify what's right for you and what you should be investing in. How do you maximize that return on investment? So it is an outlay. Microsoft licensing isn't typically cheap unless if you're in some sectors, there's discounts available, but typically it's one of the biggest expenditures across an IT estate. So how do we make sure you're getting the most out of that? And also, if you are looking to step up to a different SKU, to a higher level of licensing, what's the right way to go about that, and when should we be looking to do that? So that's the agenda for today. If at any times people have got questions, feel free to pop them in the Q&A box, and we'll take a look at those at the end. So just in terms of that kind of first topic, CSP versus NCE, both are currently still available, but the CSP is going to be kind of wound down by Microsoft. There was a deadline in the middle of last summer that it would stop being available. I believe that's been extended indefinitely, but we're not expecting to be putting many people onto CSP agreements. So NCE is kind of the way forward, and that's important to note off the bat, really. In terms of CSP agreements, they are quite flexible. You can increase and decrease. Prices are prorated. It allows for both of those things, but it is subject to upcoming price increases because the prices can fluctuate on a CSP agreement. When we look at the NCE, it's a longer term commitment. So typically there's a minimum 12 months on there. So if you've got stable user numbers, you can lock in those users, lock in those licenses, and you only have to worry about price changes kind of once a year. You can increase numbers within that window. It's more difficult to reduce or remove commitments after the initial cancellation window. As I've said, this will become the default licensing model, but one of the major benefits of NCE is that you can lock in the prices at the beginning of the agreement. So there are some announced price rises coming in April. If your NCE renewal is before that and you buy seats ahead of that price rise, you will keep that price for the 12 months. So when you go to increase numbers during the year, you'll get them at the original price, which is a bit of a benefit of that commitment. Moving on to what is in a Microsoft 365 licenses, or what is in the licenses. Obviously, we've got the core Office apps which get licensed, whether they be the web version or the desktop version, depends on the license that's been procured, particularly in the business SKUs. Unless you go up to business premium, you don't get access to the desktop applications, so that's something to bear in mind. We get quite a bit of storage included with these things. So SharePoint, OneDrive storage, depending on the number of licenses you get in SharePoint, you get a terabyte plus 10 gigabytes per license to store all of your corporate data. OneDrive, each user gets a terabyte of personal storage, so you can really start to utilize that. In the Microsoft 365 licenses, particularly across Enterprise and across Business Premium, the benefits of having those versus Office 365 are that you also get the security and compliance features, and you get the Windows licensing features. So those are a big step ups to protect your environment, and making use of those feature sets can be really handy. You also get some on-premise usage rights, so client access licenses, which people historically have paid for as part of a service agreement. If you're using the online equivalents of those tools, such as Exchange, you get the client access licenses included in Microsoft 365. So as long as you're using kind of a hybrid Exchange environment and you're not hosting mailboxes on-premise, you get those on-premise usage rights included in the Microsoft 365 licensing. So some of those other agreements that you may have with Microsoft may not be needed anymore. You get Defender products. So across the estate, you get things like Defender for Office 365 to protect emails and transport. You get kind of Defender for Endpoint included in some of these areas as well. So you can start to protect antivirus, anti-malware, and those kind of things. It's very useful to know what you've got included as part of your license. And in most of the SKUs now, you get some of the seeded premium products. So by that, there are some products which Microsoft license outside of Microsoft 365, such as Power Apps and the Power Platform, and things along the lines of Microsoft Viva, which is now coming to the fore. Those things are additional licenses, but part of those product sets are within the Microsoft enterprise agreements within these license SKUs. So there are parts of the Power Platform that you can use to extend Microsoft 365, and that is included within these licenses. And there are parts of Microsoft Viva, such as Connections and Viva Engage, which is helping you to communicate with your workforce, which is included within these license types. So it's worth knowing that those are there. And if you plan to use them, you can kind of get a feeler into those products before having to outlay any additional expenditure. The diagrams on the left and the right of this slide are from the resource at the bottom of this slide. So m365maps.com. For me, it's a bit of a Bible when it comes to licensing. You can get diagrams over what's included in each license type, what you're entitled to by buying those, and it's really clearly defined. It's not an official Microsoft resource, but there is a Microsoft employee that updates this quite frequently. And therefore, when it comes to discussing licensing, it is really useful to run through these things. You can see exactly what's included in each license type. And each of the boxes that you can see within those diagrams when you're on the website has a click-through link. So you can go to the service definition, you can really see what you're entitled to. And this resource is massively useful when it comes to knowing what's in your license, what you potentially don't know you're already paying for, but also when you're looking at upgrades and potential renewals, you can see what else is in there that you could be using that potentially you're not already. When we look at how to track usage, there are various things that we can do. So we've got usage reports within the Microsoft admin portal. So we can go into the admin portal, we can go into the reports section, and we can track usage. We can see which of the main products are being used across the organization, and we can see which potentially aren't getting the same uptake. So we can know where we can leverage those additional features and functions, provide training to team members, and help for them to know exactly what they have got available to them to increase efficiencies. There are also Power BI reports. So within the portal, we can allow access to Power BI for access to Power BI to analytics and telemetry data from Microsoft 365. And there are some templated reports which can be downloaded from MS Learn, and you can start to use Power BI to get a bit more granularity and depth in there. When we're talking about how to track what we're using, it's also important to know what you're paying for and not using. And one of the most important things to do there is to check for inactive users. So within Azure AD, you can see the time that people have last accessed the platform. There are PowerShell scripts we can also run to get that information out in a manner that we can use. Sometimes we have leavers of an organization and the process doesn't quite pick up the need to de-license them. So we end up with inactive users that we're still paying for licenses for after they've left, and that can become quite costly because you're not getting any benefit from those licenses. So it's important to understand that. From a Cloud Direct perspective, we've got a couple of tools that we can offer to help with this. We've got one thing which I can cover off later. We've got another slide on it called our M365 Health Check, which is a very brief glance through the tenant to understand exactly what is and isn't being used and how we can provide recommendations on that front. And then we've got a bit more of an in-depth M365 assessment, which goes into a bit more detail around security, compliance, but also a bit of a licensing review to say what you're using, what you could use external, what you could use additionally, and how you can use the tool set, for greater operational efficiencies. And one of the things that we would always say to track when you're talking about usage is making sure you're using those key tools, particularly around security and compliance. The threats in cybercrime have never been greater than they are now. There are new ways all the time of people trying to access data, trying to get to impersonate users to increase the reach of their attacks. So one of the things we would always recommend that people are looking at is how they're implementing their current multi-factor authentication and how they've got things like conditional access policies set up to make sure they're aware of how people are accessing their resources and how they can kind of solidify their position a little bit. And one of the key points there is to check for the scope of these policies. So a lot of people, particularly with conditional access, could have them in report only mode. They could have them scoped to a group. We want to make sure that you're getting maximum protection. So just make sure that all users are covered by those things. In terms of which license might be right for an organization, it's very difficult to kind of have a one-stop shop. It's not like we've just got a decision tree which says if you want to do X, Y, and Z, this is the license for you. There are some questions that we can ask ourselves, and there are things that we can think about, particularly with the NCE renewals, particularly with the fact that we are committing to 12 months of a particular license type. There are things that we can look at in order to make sure that we're getting the most out of the licenses we buy and the investments we make. So firstly, how many users do we have? That's a very simple question which can lead us between committing to a business SKU or an enterprise SKU. So business SKUs are limited at 300 users. If we've got more users than that in the organization, then we can very quickly know that we're going to be an enterprise. If we think that we're going to be going above that during the course of the year, then potentially there's an argument there to move to enterprise early and cater for that growth. But obviously that's a decision that needs to be made internally. We're looking at what functionality do we actually need. So a combination of what's included in the license, what we're currently using, can lead you to a decision around what we actually think we need in the coming 12 months, and we can know what we're going to do with those licenses. The more important thing potentially is what other products are we using. So some people could have an additional mail hygiene solution, such as Mimecast, that there is a Microsoft equivalent within the license stack that they're already paying for. And if that is the case, do we need to start to migrate onto that Microsoft stack? Do we need to standardize those things? And can that save us money elsewhere? That could also facilitate a step up in licensing from a budgetary perspective if we know that we can discontinue some third-party products and standardize on one platform. We can look at, do other systems integrate with Microsoft? Some people have got line of business systems, things which operate on premise, which might be better served within the Microsoft stack. They might integrate, or they may be replaced entirely by things that we've already got in play. And similarly, do we work with customers on the same platform? So are the people that you're collaborating with also using Microsoft technologies? Would it make it a lot easier for you to start standardizing around that license, increasing usage on the Microsoft platform, so that you can collaborate better and communicate better with those partners that you're often working with? And then lastly, is a point that we've already touched on, what are our aims for the next 12 months? If we know we're going to grow above the threshold for business licensing, then we can upgrade early. if we've got some real aims around security and compliance, it may be that we're looking to step up the licensing in advance of those so that we can really take advantage of that. If we know what we're going to be doing over the next 12 months, it's timely to look at that licensing up front and understand that we're covered and we've invested ahead of time to make sure we've got the functionality available as and when we need it. So looking at how do we maximize that return on investment. So we're looking at consolidating those licenses. Mentioned it on the previous slide. Is there functionality that you're paying for twice? Are there things that we can do better? We want to maximize usage of that license type. So making sure that people know what they have available, make sure they know how to use those tools, and to make sure that from a corporate level, we're encouraging the usage of those tools is really important to maximize that usage across the estate. Simple things like letting people know, you can have BYOD policies, they can utilize their Microsoft licensing across multiple devices, they can access data as long as the security is right from any time, at any time, from anywhere. And making sure that we've got relevant controls around data to increase the usage of the platform, but also make things more flexible and more available for people. And then we can start to standardize our processes, make sure everybody's working in a similar way, make sure we can do things such as implement self-service password reset alongside that, so that we're not having help desk calls for people to reset their password, but they can do that themselves through the security tools we've got available. And similarly, because we have got access to things within the Power Platform, certain tasks can be automated. So if you need to auto reply to emails, if you get something coming in quite regularly or process which happens quite regularly, we can start to put automation flows around those things to make them more efficient, to free up people's time to do other things rather than the monotonous tasks that they might already be doing. And similarly, in order to increase those efficiencies, we can give users training. So investing in some training up front has a knock-on effect. It gives people more confidence with the platform. It gives people new ways of using the platform, and it makes sure that they can really maximize the usage of the licenses that you're investing in. Again, when we talk about stepping up licenses, it's a really tricky question. Obviously, from a Microsoft perspective, they would love everybody to be buying the top level license. They would love everybody to be utilizing everything within those licenses. Operationally, that's not always realistic. So the first question when somebody wants to step up a license is, are you already using what you have? A lot of people don't even know the entirety of what's included in those licenses. So making sure that we've got the familiarity around that to make sure that functionality is being used, make sure that functionality is in use, is vital before we think about stepping up. Maximize what we're already paying for before we commit to paying for any more. Also, before stepping up, because we're making a commitment, particularly with the 12-month NCE plans, it's important to have a plan to increase that usage. There's no point in buying a higher license level if that's not going to be implemented throughout the year. So we want to have a roadmap in place so that we can go through those stages and we can know that additional expenditure is going to be utilised. Otherwise, when the renewal comes around next year, you'll be looking at stepping back down, and therefore that's just wasted expenditure, wasted investment, which could have been better utilised. A lot of people have currently got a combination of licenses, so they may be paying for a base license and then on top of that have things like Power BI or Teams Phone or a particular security feature or a particular compliance feature, when a combination of those could give more functionality at a better price point. So it's important to look at the whole range of licenses, what you are paying for and what's included, because it could work out cheaper to buy a single license which includes all of that functionality. And the bottom two are things that kind of I've already run through. Let's only increase licensing when you've got a plan to utilize the tools. There are things that you need within your kit bag, and there are things that you want to do with that. And you've got a defined strategy for implementation. So if you are planning to implement something like Teams calling when a contract expires in 6 months' time, then you can add that into your roadmap. You can add that into the strategy and you can work towards that deadline knowing that your licensing is covered. If you want to implement additional security and compliance features, make sure you've got steps for that over the next 12 months to implement, test and roll out across your estate so that by the time renewals come around, you've got all of those things in, they are being used and it's worth renewing at that price point. So make sure that strategy is in place. If you've got any questions, we can take them from the Q&A box in a second. So we'll run through that in a minute. Please submit those as and when. In terms of next steps from a Cloud Direct perspective, we've mentioned we can offer you the M365 health check. We can offer you an M365 assessment. If you're not already with us, we can offer you a managed service offering if that's of use. Part of that every year is a licensing review. We understand utilization, we understand investment, and we try to suggest improvements for you. And we can also manage that licensing on your behalf if we don't already. We can work with you on road mapping, making sure that you've got those steps in place to utilize those licenses as you procure them. And we can also assist with any implementation and adoption pieces that you may have. Just in terms of that M365 health check, it includes a license and feature gap review. We can optimize your spend as part of that. We have a brief look at security and governance, so we can look at your current security policies against best practice. That's both Microsoft best practice and Cloud Direct Experience. We realize the two aren't always in tandem, so Microsoft best practice doesn't always fit operationally, but we can take that into consideration, and we can review your data governance as well to make sure you're protected from that front. And we can review your hybrid work maturity and your roadmap, and just make sure that the productivity and collaboration tools that are within the M365 stack are in use within the organization, and then you've got a clear way of going through those. Contact details for Cloud Direct on the screen now. Feel free to reach out to us on any of the points in today's webinar, and we will get back to you. We're more than happy to talk to you and to offer you any of the services that we've got available. So thank you very much from me. I'll just check that Q&A section briefly. No questions in today, so unless anything comes through in the next minute, I'd like to thank you all for your time, and hopefully we can speak to you soon.